We can shut the door. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our session today for Surfing Swell of Success and the business behind it. My name is Eric Logan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the World Surf League, and do a little bit of double duty of somewhat hosting your favorite Jon Stewart quote, whatever you want to say, host, and also take us through our conversation today. We've got a great panel and a great discussion ahead of us for the next hour. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panel, and I'm going to start with the woman in the middle. Jessie Miley-Dyer is our Chief of Sport at the World Surf League. She oversees our entire competitive architecture for tours and competition, including the Championship Tour, the Qualifying Series, the Challenger Series, the Pro Juniors, the Longboard, and the Big Wave. She has an enormous job, and a surfer herself, 6 years on the Championship Tour, and as I always say when I intro her, and you know what I'm going to say, the first ever female Pro Junior World Champion, Miss Jessie Miley-Dyer. Welcome. To her left is a great friend of mine, co-producer, colleague, and someone who has made quite a name for themselves over the last 3 or 4 years in the world of sports documentary. Paul Martin, an Emmy award-winning producer with Box to Box Films, specializing in high-end documentaries such as Senna, Maradona. Most notably, had a massive breakthrough with the innovation and vision for the show on Netflix into its 5th season, I believe now, with Drive to Survive. And we'll talk a little bit about our show on Apple TV Plus, Make or Break. Please welcome Paul Martin. And to my immediate left, we are sad to say, but happy to have an active Championship Tour surfer. It's a pretty special moment for you in the room to be able to hear from the gentleman to my left. Qualified at the age of 20, 2010. In his rookie year, won the Billabong Santa Clarina, beating, who'd you beat? Kelly Slater, that's right. You can say it louder. Kelly's not here. You can say it if you want. He's been surfing and one of the architects and at the eye of the Brazilian storm that has taken over our sport. We'll talk to him. Please welcome. The reason why he's here, by the way, is sadly he injured his right knee at Billabong's, the Billabong Pipe Pro this year, so he's rehabilitating, and so we thought we might as well just put him to work and bring him to Texas for the first time. So please welcome from Brazil, Jadson Andre. Okay, so I thought I would start here. I'm not necessarily sure everyone knows exactly what the World Surf League is, so we just do a little baseline understanding of what it is. It is actually a thing. People always would say, and I remember when I changed careers and I moved from where I was into pro surfing, I would say to people, yeah, I'm going to go work for professional surfing at the WSL. And they're like, man, that's cool. Is that a thing? I'm like, yes, it's a thing. So professional surfing has actually been around since 1976. It started on the North Shore of Oahu when some Aussies that we can get into if you like, you know, come to the North Shore, and there was a great documentary called Busting Down Door. But it's the birth of professional surfing, and since then we've been awarding world champions since 1976. And the history of the league, real quickly, was really that from basically 1976 to 2012, it was a non-for-profit, if you think of it that way. It was owned by the brands. 50% of it was owned by the surfers, and 50% of it was owned by the brands. And so all these competitions would be set up and actually put on by the brands. What I mean by brands, it'd be like Billabong, it'd be like OP, it'd be like Hurley. And you would go to all these different websites to watch these varied events. The merchandisers would have these events and crown these champions to sell merchandise. So it wasn't necessarily a professional league. But in 2012, our current ownership structure, led by Dirk and Natasha Ziff, acquired the league with an intention of professionalizing the sport, centralizing the broadcast and centralizing. So flash forward, what we are today is a global league that owns and produces our own live broadcasts. In fact, we just wrapped up a few hours ago our event in Portugal. So last night we ran our first rounds in Portugal. Portugal with our men and women. Our tour is 10 events on the championship level tour where surfers acquire points, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is. But at the end of the year, we create a one-day final where we take the top 5 men, the top 5 women, and we crown the world champion. And a lot of people always know that Kelly Slater is probably the most famous professional surfer in the world, and he has 11 world titles. So we are the entity that actually crowns the world champions. One of the interesting things about our sport is that we were born on the internet in terms of consumption. We were one of, if not the first sport on the internet, because it was the only way people could see. Now, it was back in the AOL dial-up days when those of you who are old enough to remember what baud modems were. You would dial in and you'd have to watch something on AOL. That's how you would consume surfing. Now, we still live on the internet and broadcast to millions and millions globally around the world. In 2018, there was an announcement that the Olympic Committee has accepted surfing into the Olympics for the 2020 Games. In that, we as a league took a very proactive stance about becoming a Tier 1 qualifier for the Olympics as a professional organization, so our surfers could compete in the Olympics. And I'd like to bring Jesse in at this part and talk just a little bit about the importance of the Olympics and sort of what it means for us to be like the top qualifier for the Olympics.
I mean, the Olympics is, especially for our athletes, right? The Olympics is the biggest stage that in sports. So in a lot of ways, us becoming an Olympic sport really legitimised, to what Eric was saying around people understanding and knowing surfing, it legitimised them and us as one of the biggest sports in the world. Obviously, we've always thought it, but it's important for everyone else to see it too. So this year is our year to qualify Olympians, and we're going to be qualifying 10 men and 8 women, which is the allotment that we've been given from the IOC. That'll be in August, and it's in Tahiti. We're going to be that's our final regular season stop, and it also just happens to be the spot for the Paris 2024 Games for surfing. That is the Olympic venue, and it's also where we're going to be qualifying those people onto the games, which is going to be, it's cool for Jaddy's maybe out of the running for this year, but
it's okay. There's a wild card for Jaddy. We always have room for Jaddy. We have a, you know, the old saying, they say more cowbell. You know, the old saying, we say more Jaddy, more better. So let's talk real quickly, Paul. Paul Martin. One of the big successes of the league has been the explosion of coverage that we've had, and I think as we've seen the numbers from the sport really expand and the revenue expand. You know, a big part of it has been the storytelling that we have outside of the jersey, as we'd say. And Paul, I'd love for you to share with the crowd a bit of, you know, our relationship and how it started. And one thing that I'm not sure everybody in the room would know is that, you know, through all the success that Paul's company has had, certainly with his shows with F1 and obviously the 2 new Netflix series with Full Swing and Breakpoint, we were the first sport that you guys actually chose, and we were the second one ever done. But I'd love for you to share the story. It's a fun story.
Yeah, we made Drive to Survive, and you know, just to sort of rewind, Box to Box had sort of been a traditional production company. They had really done kind of 90-minute feature docs. We'd never really done a multi-part series before until Drive to Survive. And you know, the honest kind of genesis of the conversation with Eric came from, we finished Drive to Survive and it nearly killed us the first year, and I needed a holiday because I thought, you know, I never want to see a Formula One car ever again in my life. and took my family to, we were in Barbados and you know, wanted to take my kids for a surf lesson, and found this guy. It was like Alan Burke, former professional surfer, and I was like, it's a professional league for surfing? Like, what the hell's that? And anyway, took us out, had a surf lesson. I'm terrible at surfing. My kids were pretty terrible. But as part of it, he was just, he was like, what, you know, because I wasn't getting up on the board, I was just kind of paddling out there, and so we were just talking, and he was like, what do you do? Oh, I've just made this show, kind of Drive to Survive. Oh, okay. And he called me the next day and he said, why don't we go for a beer and I'll tell you about professional surfing and what goes on. And obviously, you know, and I was like everyone, do you know Kelly Slater? Do you know Kelly Slater? And he was like, I have Christmas. Kelly comes to my house for Christmas and stuff like that. So he just started to kind of piece together this world of kind of professional surfing. And I was like, it's fascinating and it sounds a lot nicer than Formula One paddocks and all that stuff. So I came back to England, said, find me the head of the World Surf League, and got introduced to kind of Eric, and we generally, it was the, you know, it was the best phone conversation I've ever had, where we picked up the phone and ready to do our pitch of kind of box to box and who we were and what we were about and what we wanted to do, and Eric, you know, just jumped in and said, listen, you know, I just want to say, I've just watched Drive to Survive. I think it's the greatest documentary series I've ever seen. And if you want to do the same thing with surfing, we're in. And I was like, I hadn't even said a word on the phone. And I was like, okay. And we had a development guy, Kieran, at the time. And I'm looking at Kieran going like, is this the right guy? Can this guy really? And we just went from there. And it's been such a, you know, you know, I shouldn't say this because I've got a Netflix panel later. It's my favourite show to make. Like, I'm really, because the world, you know, the athletes, you know, the administrators, the owners are just so, the way that they've welcomed us in, the way that they've allowed our cameras to come into this world, to document the stories, to really dig into it, it's just been so refreshing. You know, sports, these documentaries are hard because there's so many barriers, you know, that, you know, individual athletes may or may not want to do it. Teams may or may not want to do it. Administrators within those teams may or may not want to do it. So you're constantly arm wrestling for access. And, you know, from day one, the World Surf League has just been great about opening their doors to us completely and allowing us to come in and make this amazing show. You know, we're really proud of it. It's in season, you know, season 2 dropped a couple of weeks ago. You know, if you haven't seen it, go and see it, because it's honestly some of the best work that we do, and you know, you'll really get a feel for, you know, what it is these guys and girls go through on a kind of a weekly basis. And I can just say, it's just, you know, working with these guys has been an honest pleasure and an honor, and you know, and long may it continue.
Thank you, Paul. Jaddy, I want to bring you in here for a second. You've been on tour for quite some time, and what is it? I remember when we first started talking about it, and you know, our tour and Jaddy, well, they'll go on the tour, it's like a traveling circus. You know, it's hundreds of people that just sort of move around the planet nomadically, and it's sort of like chasing these waves. And then all of a sudden, I sort of show up as the CEO and introduce myself, and I'm going, hey, but here's another new idea. We're going to add more people to the traveling circus, and they're going to have all these cameras, and we need to be like in your face. And in moments of like right before you put your jersey on, in the moment right when you take your jersey off, right after you get injured. In the early days, what was that like? How did that feel as an athlete to have Paul and the team come like every round? And what was the tour saying at the time?
I would say, right, that was the first time that I felt like, oh, I'm a superstar. So, and yeah, it's been great. It's been really great. And I'm not sure if you guys have watched it yet, but it's just amazing. And I'm a huge fan of Drive to Survive. Yeah. And when you guys said that we were going to do the same thing, I was like, nah, that's not true. I don't believe it. So yeah, it's been amazing, and we are having a great time, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be even better.
Season 3 will be even better, yeah. So one of the other benefits, I think, for our sport is, again, continuing the growth. So one of the key business strategies behind what we do is consumption, and we're predominantly an ad-based model. So think of it more in a traditional sense. We don't have a large media rights package that we'd go out and sell like you would see with traditional ball and stick sports. Our model is actually global. Our model is actually ad revenue and sponsor driven. So For us, it's more of a traditional network model that I used to come from, which was sort of like monetizing the eyeballs. So the more people who can watch it, the more money we can make. And so one of the things in introducing the sport is having them understand the dynamics of the sport. And Jesse, one of the things that I think has been interesting from the tours and competition point of view is that this show has allowed us a great platform to educate people about our sport. So talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, you know, when you think about the structure of the tour and everything that goes into it, even just on a very baseline of not knowing when we're going to be competing, you know, we have event windows. I have 10 days to pick the best 4 days for competition. It all depends on what the surf is like and what, you know, Mother Nature and the ocean actually gives you. You end up with this very complicated kind of model of explaining what's going on, and then you have judging and things like that, which, you know, in every sport, the judging, refereeing, it's always controversial, very hard to understand. And so to have these guys here come in, it becomes a really awesome opportunity for us to explain the sport and to sit there and have other people as well in our world kind of, you know, sit there and go through how you get on tour, what different waves are like, how things are judged. You know, my head judge is on the show, kind of for the first time ever, putting him in front of something, which is cool for him, right, to be there and talking about that.
So, you know, Paul, when you approached our season, like our second season or whatever it is, it's a very organic sort of process, and talk just a little bit, you know, unpack with our show, and I think it's true of all your shows, by the way, unpack a little bit about the character arcs, because one of the things I think is interesting is when we said that we were doing the show, a lot of people thought that this was going to be a surfing highlight show that we normally would make through like the studio division that we have at the WSL, which would be like, here's who won Heat 1, here's who won Heat 2, and it would be very, very highlight driven. And what I think surprised a lot of folks at the WSL, first and foremost, Paul, was the fact that our show with you is, I would say, 80 to 85% character driven. So talk a little bit about how you find these storylines and characters, you know, for our show.
I think you know, we have this kind of in-house mantra which makes no sense whatsoever, but it sort of helps us kind of frame this of we're always like, these shows or these documentaries have to work. If you took the sport out of it, they kind of have to work. And of course, it is a nonsense, but what it means is that we are constantly looking for those bigger themes, those bigger narratives that we can really land on, and then hopefully just use the sporting element as really the payoff to what you learn about that character or how you follow that character's kind of journey. And how we kind of come to this is we spend a lot of time sitting around thinking about the what ifs. Well, what if so and so did this, or what if so and so did that and that, and we started to believe that we're almost like, sporting sages, because this is no lie. When we approached season 2 of Make or Break, we sat in a room and I can't remember who said it. I think it was me, so I'll take the credit for it. And I was like, episode 1, season 2, we call it Hawaii 5-0 because Kelly's 50th birthday and he wins pipe, right? And that was November before kind of pipe. And we go to pipe, we start filming, and we know we've got the build up. We know we've got Kelly's kind of 50th birthday, which, I think people need to let that sink in. Yeah. There's a 50-year-old on the world stage winning events. Yeah. There's no other sport where that exists. No. And Kelly's a whole different, conundrum and kind of factor in kind of the show. So we'd written this episode, Hawaii 5-0, and we're sort of in pipe, and the producers on the ground are kind of calling me, and they're like, he's going to win it. He's going to win it. And I'm like, he's not going to win it. We just kind of ran. They're like, he is going to win it. And he won it. And it was one of the most remarkable days that we'd ever had in that. I had crew members phoning me up in tears. Everyone was just so emotionally invested.
I cried that day.
Yeah. And
I was really emotional for him.
There wasn't, there was nobody on that beach or any other competitor, probably apart from Seth, that wanted, that didn't want Kelly to win that. It was extraordinary. And, and we took that episode into the edit and we cut that in about, normally these episodes take 15, 16 weeks to kind of edit. We cut that in about 8 weeks because it was just there, and you know, and so that's kind of part of our process is that talking about the different scenarios, thinking about where those kind of payoffs can be. You know, in season 1, you know, we learned about, and we had no background in surf at all. None of the team really knew anything about it, and so it's actually really refreshing to come in with that attitude of like, I'm not coming in with any preconceived notions of who these people are, what these stories are, what the politics of it all are, you know. And on season 1, we learned about these 3 kids that had all been, you know, picked up as 10-year-olds by Quicksilver, and I think it was Leo, it was Jack, and it was Kanoa. And there was this amazing, you know, video of them as 10-year-old kids rolling around pipe and rolling around. And the moment we saw that, we were like, that's an episode. Like the Quicksilver kids, it's just too good, you know, and charting, you know, how these, you know, 10-year-old kids that are sat there saying, hey, I want to be, you know, one day I want to be Kelly Slater and I want to win the world championship, or how it kind of played out for them. So it's just things like that, you know. For us as a company, the research is always money in the bank. Whether it's an archive doc, whether it's a kind of a, you know, an access doc like this, you know, still the research is the most important part, because the sport can only ever take you so far. It can only ever, if you concentrate on the, well, who wins here and who wins there, then you are always going to end up with a highlight show, you know, an elevated highlight show, but fundamentally a highlight show. And so, you know, for us, it's that research, it's spending time with the characters. A lot of what we do in the beginning is we just go and with no cameras, we just sit and we talk to all the athletes. And to give you an example, you know, when we first started the show, everybody was like, yeah, listen, I think most of the surfers are going to be into it, but there's going to be one guy you're probably going to have a problem with. And we're like, okay. And they were like, Gabriel Medina, the dark night of kind of surfing. And you're like, okay. So we were in pipe and just texting Gabby and, you know, said, hey, you know, Drive to Survive. And he was like, I'll come over your house. And again, this is an indication of how accessible, you know, the surfers are. You know, every athlete in every other sport comes with about 5 people. You know, every time you're like, okay, and there's the PR, and there's, you're the manager, and you're the, hey, how you doing, Gabby turned up on his own. Oh, you're the Dark Lord of Surfing. How you doing? Good to meet you, Gabby. Came in, sat down, and just this sweetheart of a kid was in front of us telling us, you know, oh, surfing and blah, 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 blah. And then right at the end of it, he was like, did you guys make Senna? And we're like, yeah, we made Senna. You know, Senna was my hero. We're like, no, we didn't know that. And he's like, yeah, I love that film. And from that moment on, Gabby was just, he was just in, you know.
Well, we had the most amazing coverage of him in season 1 with his new wife, Yasmin, and he just fired his father. And, you know, for those of you who hadn't seen season 1, go back. That's episode 2, I believe. That's what it was. I want to go back real quick. Ex-wife now, I know, I think. But, yes. Well, that goes to season 2. That's where I was going, Jaddy. It's like, he comes back, and it's sort of like, remember how great it was with Yasmin? And it's like, well, just kidding. Now they're divorced. So that's episode 6 of this one. So, Jaddy, you had said that you cried at Pipeline, and I did too. But I mean, you cried at Pipeline. Talk about, you know, as a surfer, you know, what that moment meant for the sport. And again, I think it goes back to what Paul says. Let this sink in for a second. Kelly Slater, at the age of 50, wins the biggest event on the calendar in the most challenging conditions. I mean, what did it mean to you watching that?
I'm 32 years old, and Kelly's the same age as my dad. And that was kind of like his dream to win another contest, because we know how hard it is right now. And with all the love and respect we all have to Kelly, he's 51 right now, so it's not as easy as before to win a competition. And Pipe is such a special place for him, and we all know how that meant for him. And when he won, like, he was crying like a baby. And I was really like happy for, not just not myself, I think everyone who watched surf forever was emotional for Kelly. And that's why I got a photo with him right after the final. We were both like crying, and that was amazing.
It was amazing. And I think to your point, Paul, I remember sitting watching this happen, and I was with our producers, and it's like, I can't edit, a phone book, and I go, I could even make this edit. This thing tells, the story tells itself. And I think the true testament of that particular episode is when Kelly saw it. And Kelly rang me up and said, this may be the greatest 42 minutes in the history of surfing that I have ever seen. Now, certainly it's about himself, but he is the world's harshest critic. Let's just be clear. Narcissism doesn't run anywhere through. I wanted to go a little bit about our sport. So, Jesse, you sort of talked a bit about the dynamic nature of our sport. So let me reframe it, and I'd love to get you to talk about this. So, one of the interesting things about professional surfing, unlike any other sport that's out there, is our athletes have to be ready to go at a moment's notice. So we'll establish what is called a window, and it'll be, call it, for 2 weeks, whether it's 14 days or 10 days, and we have to turn up to our field of play. Our field of play is the ocean, and there's so many conditions: rain, wind, tide, swell, direction, all these things that change at the drop of a hat. And so talk a little bit about that dynamic, because again, Jesse, you were a competitor as well. It's not like basketball or football that tomorrow at 4 o'clock you're going to be on. We show up and you get there at 4:30 in the morning in the dark. Walk us through that process.
No, for sure. It's a little bit like knowing you have a big presentation at work. For me, my boss is Eric, and I know that I've got to give him this thing, and you walk in and he goes, "Just kidding, it's not today." So for us, for the athletes, it's hard. Absolutely. It's hard in managing, managing your energy, I'll say. Hard in that it's, we love the sport, right? So it is as it comes. It's almost like you have to know what your triggers are, to turn yourself on and off to compete. For us, and in the role that I have now, we're there very early in the morning. I have an army of forecasters, both local and international, who are looking at charts for me, looking at what the end of the window is going to look like, what the swell looks like, what the wind looks like, and I try as best as I can to speak to the whole business and tell them, hey, I think that tomorrow is going to be on because we think that the swell and the wind is going to do this. But sometimes I'm texting Eric and I'm like, so the wind is just changed and I'm about to pull the pin. And it's kind of tricky, but at the same time, it's what we all love about surfing, and as surfers, we're so driven by the ocean and wanting to kind of be on this path to better conditions, and where can I find good waves. And there's a joke as well in surfing, and Eric certainly knows it as well, that you'll look everywhere, and surfers love to look in every nook and cranny and look for little waves, and that's kind of sometimes what we're doing on the tour, right? Yeah. Looking for the best spot, and I don't get to surf it anymore, but...
No. Well, you talk about the changing nature, and yeah, as all of us as surfers, and Paul, you've surfed, so we'll throw you in with us up here. We're always looking for that wave. I want to come back to this room for a second, because if you're not intimate with our sport, I'll give you an analogy that can sort of change. Imagine if you are in the middle of the NBA playoffs, and at a halftime, someone just decides to change the rim height from 10 foot to 15, or decides that the free throw line is going to go to 45 feet. This is what happens in our sport every minute of every hour of every day. And I wanted to talk to you, Jaddy, because you've been doing this for so long that, sometimes in our tournaments, you would surf in the morning and you could then get surfing another round later in the day. And so let's use pipeline as an example. Yeah. So pipeline, the Bonsai pipeline on the north shore of Oahu, is one of the most dangerous critical waves in the world when it barrels over a reef that is almost as shallow as what we're standing on. And it can be like that in the morning, and you're conditioned, and then within 6 hours, the wind could go completely onshore. There could be no barrels, and it may not be breaking at all, and it's different. So what is that like as a competitor, in the sport, to live with that?
Sometimes we get to surf, we get to compete 3, sometimes 4 times a day. That happens sometimes, and at pipe, the ocean changed a lot, right? So, for example, in the morning, you're gonna surf like 3-4 meter waves, and by 2 hours or 3 hours later, it's gonna be like 1 meter. So you need to be able to readjust, and as you said, we've been doing this for such a long time, and we kind of know, like, we're ready for that, but it's not easy. As you said, like, when you play soccer, you know the ball gonna be there, and kind of nothing gonna change, but surfing changed a lot, so that's what makes our sport really interesting.
And Paul, from a narrative perspective, I think it was something that, as your team was falling in love with the sport, from a little bit, talk about the romance of how you bring that to life as well through the stories.
Yeah, I mean, I just think on that, on the window, and you know, the challenges that it had for, you know, for the surfers and for the league, was really the opportunity for us in terms of the show that we made. You know, when we came into it and we realized that, you know, there's this 10-day window and only really 3 of the days are going to be kind of surf. So what that meant for us is that we have our cast of characters in one place for, you know, 7 of those 3 days where they're not going to be competing. So it enables us to kind of delve a little bit deeper into those stories, you know, versus when we make kind of Drive to Survive, where, you know, the drivers turn up on a Thursday, you know, they have a press day, Friday to practice, Saturday practice, qualifying, Sunday race, and they're gone, you know, and we know, and so the challenge of that is how do we find those little bits of access around that really busy schedule. The opposite was true with surf, you know, so for us, you know, we love the fact, you know, we're going down to the call and Jesse's like, oh, it might be on and off, and we're like, please be off, please be off, please be off. And by the way, can I just say, Jesse has the hardest job in sport, because the first thing that you learn in surfing is like, nobody knows anything about the waves. No, like, they're like, is it going to be on? Is it going to be off? I don't know, like that, you know, and Jesse's in the middle of that, and she has to make the call, and there's no glory to, you know, to saying it's on, because someone will be like, yeah, but it's only this high, and da-da-da, and you should have waited, and you should have, you know, no one's like, oh, good call, Jesse, yeah, well done, like, yeah, you made a really good call today. So Jesse honestly has the hardest job in sport that I've ever seen, because there's just no upside to the decision that she makes, ever.
No, it's never. And it's the same thing with the tournaments. It's sort of like, you know, you run this huge field, there's only one surfer at the end that's happy, and it's the one who won. So it's just the way it always works. I wanted to switch gears a little bit, and Jesse, you obviously were a competitor, and I think that, you know, when you were surfing, there was a fairly big misogynistic chasm between men and women surfing, and I think that, you know, some of the historical stereotypes that have been in our sport are warranted, frankly. You know, localism, inequality, and things of that nature. But one of the things that we as an organization, we have really 2 main guiding principles in terms of what we do in terms of a business. So, you know, our core business is to create the world's largest platform for professional surfing and crown world champions. The underpinnings of that is, number one, our strong belief, because the ocean's our playground, about our commitment to sustainability, the ocean, and so forth. The second is equality and inclusion. And I'd love, Jesse, for you to talk a little bit about how important that is to us as a league.
No, for sure. I mean, so for us, one of the things that we're super proud of, and something that definitely resonates with me as a former competitor, because, you know, as Eric's saying, when I was competing as a professional surfer, it definitely wasn't the world that we have now. Equal prize money for us, and being the first American-based sports league to do so is a big one. And it's so important to the athletes, and it's so important to us in kind of having that statement and having a real, you know, a tangible statement around the value that we put on women's performances and the women's tour in general. For me personally, I only ever won a single championship tour event, and I made $10,000. And at the time, I thought I was killing it, because, you know, I was young and I had won this event, but, you know, in relation to what the men were making at the time, it was, you know, it's a very, very small percentage of the prize money. And, you know, when you look now, it's 10 times that on the women's tour. And that's something that I'm definitely really proud of. Like, of all of the things that I, you know, achieved as a professional athlete, the things that I have done and been able to do here with the team, I'm far more proud of, because it's something that will continue to live on, you know. And so for us to have, you know, these great executives like Eric come in and our new ownership group since 2013 and have people outside of those kind of core sports, called surfing crew that we had that used to run the business, really come in and elevate the women's platform has been a massive one for us. And so, you know, when you watch Make or Break and you see the women competing at Pipeline for the first time, and this year we have the fully combined tour. We're going to every spot the same as the men. Pipeline for us is a huge one because there's so much symbolism in Pipeline. Like you hear these guys and all of our surfers talk about Pipeline and what it means as a sport and what it means to the tour. You know, candidly, it wasn't always a space that, you know, the women really surfed that much. There were some who really pushed it and like really tried to get in. It's the most competitive lineup in the world, and Jaddy knows that better than anyone. You know, it's so hard to get a wave out there, and one of the things with us going to Pipe is, you know, really showing this next generation that this is a wave for them, and it is already paying off for us. I think, you know, I see all of these young up and coming women who are doing these crazy maneuvers all the time on Instagram, and I see them now posting, you know, edits from Pipe. And I have young girls coming up and telling me, oh, I've been surfing Pipe, and like, it's cool because they're all just going to see it as that's the way it is.
Well, and I think, Jaddy, I'd like to talk to you about sort of your view, because you've seen the change in the company from the ASP days to the WSL days. And I'd love to get your point of view about that change, and then to piggyback a little bit onto what Jesse's saying. What have you seen in terms of the combined tours, in terms of the talent of the women that are coming up compared to when you were first on tour?
Yeah, I would say today that is a girl that they can easily beat one of the boys on tour.
Wow!
I'm not kidding.
There we go.
They're great right now.
Yeah.
And see, they doing errors. Like, see what Caitlin, how old is she? 16, 17?
17?
17.
He's referring to a woman who, her name is Caitlin Simmers. She's 17 years old, who actually qualified for the World Tour last year and felt she was too young to go on tour, and so she's surfing right now. But yeah.
And that's how great she is. And the way she was surfing at Sunset, which was our second stop, there was guys not even close to her. So that's how the woman the girls has improved. And when we talk about Pipe, like sometimes I surf Pipe for like 5 hours, I don't get a single wave. I'm not kidding, like 5 hours waiting, trying to find a wave, and I don't get waves, and that is girls getting like 3-5 waves. So they're pretty solid.
Yeah. How many waves does Medina get at Pipe is the question.
Oh, Medina, he always gonna get more waves than anybody.
The Dark Knight. So,
by the way, just 1 second. Gabriel, he's only 29 years old. He's a young.
He's a young gun.
He's really young, and he's lovely.
He's lovely. So what I wanted to talk a little bit with you, Jaddy, because it's a real privilege to have you. And again, sorry that you're hurt. I tried to talk you out of going back out at Pipeline. You didn't listen to me. But
I tried.
I know, you tried. So in surfing, the countries are very representative. We've got massive territories that really drive our business. Obviously, the United States, Australia is represented by Jesse, Europe, France, Portugal, we are. I'll just kind of lump Paul into sort of the Euro stuff. And then Brazil. Brazil is one of the most powerful forces on the professional tour, but it wasn't like that when you started. And so in surfing, we refer to this thing called the Brazilian Storm. And the Brazilian Storm really is this onslaught of talent that comes out of what is effectively a very small country in a small region of South America that over-indexes on the world tour. And you, Jad San Andre, is the godfather of the Brazilian Storm. And you actually nourished, well, you and also another world champion by the name of Andreu de Souza, who won a world title, but wasn't the first Brazilian to win a world title. So I'd love for you to talk just a little bit about when you and Adriano got on and what that meant to the youth to the Gabriel Medinas, to the Italo Ferreiras, to the Felipe Toledos, what it meant to them to see you guys on the tour. What does it mean to a Brazilian?
Yeah, today I think we are 10 guys on tour, right? 10?
Yeah.
Not sure, 10 or 11. But back in 2010, there was just 2, which was Adriano de Souza and myself. And Brazil had no world title. So I think 2011, 2012, Gabriel Medina, Italo Ferreira, and Felipe Toledo, they qualified to the tour. And Adriano always was like the biggest name from Brazil to get the world title. But he didn't win the world title until Gabriel.
Yep, yeah. So Gabriel Medina comes on in 2012, the first Brazilian to win the world title in 2014.
In 2014, and then I'm pretty sure that's the reason why Adriano won in 2015.
That's right.
Because he saw Gabriel getting the title, and he was like, Adriano is such a competitive guy. He's like, how I never win the title yet. So after that, I think the last 9 or 10 titles we have.
Yeah, so last 9 world champions, 6 of them have been from Brazil, which is pretty remarkable run. And currently we have, as Djadi was saying, 10 in the top side. One of the things I want to kind of go back to for a second. Let's talk about Italo Ferreira. So, son of a fisherman from the favela. Talk about how surfing as a sport provides a way out for these boys and girls in Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, I know Italo since day one. Like his very first international travel was with me. He's 5 years younger than myself, but I look at him like my little son. And I just see like where he came from, and he's world champion, he's Olympic champion, and how surf has changed his life. That's just, I mean, when I start to talk about that, I get a little bit emotional. Yeah. As a Brazilian, as a South American, we are too passionate about it, but that's just great, just amazing to see. Like, I feel so honored to know that I have a little bit of like energy right there. I was there even before they qualified, and see how great they're doing right now. And see, like, every time they see me, they kind of like appreciate what we've been doing for them. I know surf is an individual sport, but at the same time, I think that's the difference between Brazil and the rest of the world. Yeah. I know we are competing against each other, but at the same time, we are supporting each other so much. So I think at the end of the day, I hope the other athletes, the other surfers, they see what we're doing, and so they see that.
It is the community of Brazil. Paul, I mean, I get to come to it with fresh eyes. Mm-hmm. It's striking to see, even when Jadson or the other Brazilians are eliminated from the tournament, they don't go home. Other surfers typically are on the next flight out to go to the next event to practice. But I mean, talk about that. I mean, that's something you saw firsthand, Paul, from the very first event.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I almost had a question for you, Eric, in terms of that. You know, the epicenter of surfing had traditionally been Australia and west coast of kind of the US, and then to suddenly have this region where the sport was exploding, you know, these guys come in and you know, they not only do they kind of dominate events, you know, on the waves, you know, but as Eric said, you know, they're there in the athletes area cheering for each other. There's, you know, they drive the real atmosphere. And I just wondered, like, for you as kind of the league owner, what challenges does that have in terms of suddenly a region that hadn't really been a traditional kind of surfing region explodes? And
it's a great question. It's, you know, I think that there's huge positives to it. And I think if you look at our events that we have in Saquarema, where we do our CT event, I mean, there's 40,000 people on the beach. 40,000 people that will come to a beach to watch a surf event. And in Brazil, yeah, it's crazy. And if we were in Rio, it'd probably be double that, you know, if we were up at Praia. I think the challenge about that is that, you know, as a global sport, you know, what Jesse and the team work hard to do is to try to have more global representation. So, and growing the sport is growing going into other territories. Brazil's a model that I think has been put in front of us in terms of showcasing the power of cultural surfing. And in cultural surfing, it's the country sport in Australia, and it's huge there. But now we have Morocco represented on tour. Now we have Ramsey on tour. We've got surf for the first time from Indonesia on tour. And I think that Paul, is really the beautiful nature about where we are from the both men and women's side, that we're going to continue to expand and taking the lessons from Brazil in terms of partnerships and things with Globo and how big it is. It's a model for us sort of going forward. Yeah. I think.
And is that something you will, there's great waves in Ireland. It'd be great to find a group of Irish surfers to come on. Is that a model that you are actually, if we can put some resource and investment into those little pockets around the world, and then we can truly sort of build out the sport?
Well, and I think, so it's a great point. I think, maybe I'll answer it this way, and Jesse can highlight this. The thing about our sport, and I think for us here in the States, maybe Major League Baseball is a good analogy in terms of the farm system. So if you want to play in the major leagues, obviously you can go through college and get drafted. But if you were just not making it to the major leagues, you'd play A ball or B ball or AAA ball, and you get called up to go to the major leagues. In our sport, we have the same feeder system as well with our tours and competition structure, with the qualifying series and the challenger series. And one of the things, Jesse, I'd love for you to talk about on that is how we answer the global question Paul's answering by taking all of these opportunities and having it funnel up into the championship tour.
No, for sure. So one of the things too, in highlighting that tour structure, right, is that, the Challenger Series is where you're going to qualify into the tour where Jadson is, and then we also have these regional series. And the idea of the regional series is, to your point, it's the ability that you can compete close to home, not have to spend huge amounts of money to travel all around the world, be able to, for someone like Rio Aida, who's our Indonesian on tour, it's really hard to get visas. So we've really looked at the model a few years ago and broke it out so that you have these opportunities closer to home. And, like you say, we have all of these groups of people that are competing together, and we don't have anyone from Ireland yet, but there are great waves in Ireland, to your point. We used to have a contest in Scotland, but
pretty cold in there.
Yeah, it's pretty cold. It's not for me, but it's awesome for us to be able to have contests and to have athletes from all over the world. And the great thing is, there are waves all around the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's waves. We have some time left. There's a mic up front. We're going to keep the conversation going. Please, if someone has a question, come on down. Let's do this. This will be fantastic. Hi.
Hi, my name is Doug Newcomb. I'm from Todos Santos, Mexico.
Yes.
Where there's no surf.
We love Todos Santos.
I have a question, but you guys should have a contest in Ireland where they're charging like so crazy these days. My question is, the WSL is doing all this really cool stuff. I'm curious, and I came in late, I don't know if you addressed this, what are you doing to help surfers transition into a career? Because it's a pretty short time frame. And Jadson, I'd love to hear, what you're doing. I mean, there's some people have transitioned pretty well. There's other people, a lot of stories that people didn't transition so well. So I'd love to hear kind of what the WSL's doing to help. Surfers after they retire.
So I'll have Jesse tackle it, but I'd answer it first. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. The first thing we try to do is try to share more about like who we are as an organization of sport and business, and try to help educate our surfers, in terms of just life skills that they'll need, whether or not it's like helping them understand the benefits of like health insurance or things of travel, and so we've tried to provide as many opportunities not only within our sport to give them life skills, but there's also a lot of opportunities for them outside of their retirement. Jessie being a former pro surfer herself, and a number of people, and given how big the organization is, there's a lot of different ways for them to contribute. But Jessie, I mean, this is something you and I talk about actually quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a good point, because I can definitely speak from personal experience in terms of retiring and making those decisions, and transitioning into a career can be tricky. It can be definitely hard, and there's people who've done it really well, and there's some people who have struggled with it. Depending on kind of where you are, globally, I was really lucky coming out of Australia. I actually had a scholarship to go to uni in Sydney, and kind of went through that track, which was really good for me. It was something that, you know, the organisation was really supportive of at the time, and actually the chairman of the board at the time really encouraged me to go, and encouraged me also to kind of think about the degrees that I would do and how I would use that. There's definitely an element of, you know, sitting there with the people around you and thinking about, you know, the skill set that you have and how you can use that into, you know, making it into another career. We also have a couple of great programs actually in the different regions where we've partnered with higher education, definitely in South America, definitely in Australia in particular. We had a couple of relationships here in America as well, in terms of, you know, having the opportunities for surfers either to you know, complete full degrees or even just, you know, take different subjects and things like that. But it's a good question, because it is definitely, it's a hard thing that, you know, people can face, and it can be tricky if you don't really know exactly what you want to do.
We have I was going to say, one of the things is actually,
just because that and related, and I don't want to take up too much time.
Sure.
Like, conversely, like guys coming out of the Vela, like, and all of a sudden they're on tour and they got this money, like you know, the before and after, or even in between, like how does WSL kind of helping those surfers?
So that's a great follow-up question. In Brazil specifically, believe it or not, we have a great regional president, his name's Ivan, who does surfer symposiums and brings in a lot of outside points of view to talk about it. In fact, you're speaking at one coming up for Ivan. Talk a little bit about those conversations that the company may have that help surfers in life.
I mean, I'm here right now with you guys, so it's kind of like a way to do it. And if we compare where we are right now with I'm not going too long, like 6-7 years ago, we have been improving a lot. And yeah, thanks for your question. That was awesome.
Yeah. So I think it's the communication we have with the surfers and more opportunities we give them outside of the jersey that just sort of broadens them out. But thank you for that. Hi.
Yeah, I'm George Foster from Stanford University, and I teach sports management there. Cool. Just in relationship to the last question, the plethora of online material makes it much easier for athletes while they're in the game to actually do it. I've taught a lot of programs for NBA athletes and NFL athletes, and it's really hard to get their mind share because they're struggling to stay on the teams on that. But it's really a question for Paul. I see a lot of proposals for sports on this, and everybody's got, you know, drive to survive stuff, and the networks and whether it's Netflix, Amazon, are being inundated with proposals of this. How are you sort of doing the differentiation? Because it's just a flood of material that may sort of look very, very similar in terms of not continuing the audience engagement for even a whole series, let alone three series.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, we, you know, internally at Box to Box, we talk about that a lot. I mean, I think to that point, we are, you know, Box to Box is probably the only company that doesn't roll around pitching its drive to survive for XYZ. You know, we want to believe that we can find something unique about all these sports. And as I look at the shows that we've done, you know, Drive to Survive is very tonally very different from Make or Break, which is different from Full Swing and Break Point. You know, we're very conscious of not, you know, we're not James, who I run Box to Box with. Both of us are not cookie cutter producers. We have no desire to say, hey, let's do everything that we do on Drive to Survive and drop it onto all these different sports. So we approach them sort of part of that research process that I talked about, of before we even pick up a camera, we want to spend time in the world understanding the athletes, understanding the challenges that the athletes face, even understanding the geography of you know, a Formula One paddock is very different from a surf competition. It's very different from, you know, a tennis Grand Slam or a, you know, a major in kind of golf. And, you know, and it's kind of, it feels like a, you know, it feels like a silly thing to say, but the geography of those sports can influence the storytelling, and in terms of, you know, just the practicalities of coverage of how do you go to the Masters and suddenly try to follow or try to tell the story of a handful of golfers that where one's, you know, a mile over there and one's there. You know, on surf, you know, it sort of speaks to, on Drive to Survive, you know, I know where Lewis Hamilton's going to be you know, from a Thursday to a Sunday, pretty much to the minute. The challenge with surf, you know, when we were, you know, trying to do some pickup interviews, we were like, where's Gabby Medina? Well, he could be in Costa Rica, or he could be back in Brazil, or he might have gone to Australia. No one knows. And, well, can someone get hold of him? No one, you know, he's surfing, he's not picking up his phone. So it's just things like that. And you know, I think it's very, you know, I think a lot of companies are going into these sports and think that it's easy, and it's really, really, these shows are really, really difficult. And, you know, each one you really have to, you know, get to know the world, really spend time in it to do the best possible version of it.
Great question. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hey, Tim Barber from Engage Rem. Actually, I'm well represented on the panel because I'm a dual national from both UK and Australia. Questions for you, actually, Eric. With obviously with the sport, obviously getting more media coverage on the back of Make or Break, and you talking about kind of your kind of subscription ad model that you kind of you run on as a business. Moving forward, how do you best engage with your audience, understanding who your audience are and how you actually monetize them as well, with a particular reference to the Gen Z audience, because obviously what they really care about, that's a very competitive audience to get in front of, but they really care about social issues, they really care about equality, they really care about sustainability. So as a business, kind of what's your approach to that, and what are some of the initiatives that you're doing to best engage with them?
Well, I feel like that's our next panel, because I could talk about that for days, but it's a fantastic question. Thank you. So just a couple quick sort of, I would say, atmospheric answers to the great question about the monetization, get back off of the sport. For us, the great thing is because we are global, we have the ability to monetize globally in terms of like global streamers, like we do with our partner YouTube right now, and how we sell against that. We also have the ability to bifurcate our feed and do multiple languages. So for example, in Brazil, we have a great partnership with Globo, which is the biggest broadcaster there. And when we look inside of Australia, we can then carve up our rights for Channel 7. So I think as the sport continues to grow, we have the ability to carve the rights up by region from a streaming perspective, in addition to a linear perspective that way. As far as connecting with the Gen Z, look, I think, you know, we certainly know how social issues are critically important to this generation, and it's really important to us as a league from top to bottom. And it's not necessarily a Gen Z thing as much as it's just we feel as an organization it is the way to move forward in terms of what a company with a global footprint can have. And we take a lot of pride in that. And I think what we have seen is when you look at, for example, the average age of our consumers versus other stick and ball sports, we're 20 years younger than them. So one of the things I can do is I can sit in front of all the media companies, no matter who you are, and I can say, here's a group of people you can't get to because, number one, they're pretty exclusive to surfing, and number two, they're already predisposed to be digital, because like I said earlier, this entire sport was born digitally, which means even if you're my age, you've been conditioned to watching us online. So that gives us a great relative advantage when we go to market to monetize our media rights. And I think from a values perspective, it is the way we live, and our surfers certainly are a big part of that. We got time for one more question, but they're going to give me the hook, but I apologize. But hi.
Hi, I'm Ali. I'm the Content and Creative Director at Austin FC. Question on a filmmaking and working with an organization. You know, filmmaking has arcs. It talks about challenging things that might not always be like favorable to the brand that you're working on or the organization. How, as you as a filmmaker and you as an organization, work together to, I guess, tell those difficult stories in an authentic way without like having a lot of conflict?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll start and I'll have Paul sort of finish. It's a good one. You know, it's really tough because what makes his shows work, and I mean Box to Box with Paul, is the authenticity of what it is, and that it's not sanitized and whitewashed. And I think, Paul, you know, we had to approach this with a high degree of trust. And, you know, I mean, look, our very first episode we shot, just to take you back in time for a second, it was before the women were surfing at Pipeline. It was hot off the heels of COVID, and To make matters worse, we had a huge issue about the fact that there was a shark attack that happened at Honolulu Bay right before the women were surfing. We had to have some very intense conversations. I had just become the CEO at the time, and I'm like, what the hell did I just sign up for? It's chaos everywhere. We're still in the pandemic, and literally after I get off the phone with Jesse, who called me, which is on the show, that there was a shark attack, I get notified as I'm walking to the house that I've been diagnosed with COVID, and I have to go public and cancel Pipeline for the surfers because I got sick. And all the cameras are sort of going, and we were comfortable with that because of a conversation Paul and I had about knowing the trust. And Paul said, you have to trust us, and I have to trust him that he's going to represent authentically what it is. That's what's going to work, and the sport wouldn't be brought into disrepair or disharm. But I mean, it's a great question because I think a lot of people wanted to approach it, and it was something we talked about from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately these shows are always a partnership, and that we want to be doing multiple seasons of these things, and so we do work very closely with whether it's a WSL, Formula One, those guys. But we're pretty, when we make the pitch to kind of do the show, we're very much like, look, we know what we're good at. You guys are clearly good at kind of running sports league. Let us just do our thing, and don't panic in the moment, when things like that are happening, when there's shark attacks and there's COVID and there's all that stuff, and everyone immediately thinks, oh my God, that's going to be all over the first episode. And, we're not editing those episodes until 2 or 3 months further down the line. They're probably not going to air until at least, 8-9 months after that incident's happened. And everything with the benefit of time feels less emotional and less urgent. And sometimes things like that just are not going to make it into the cut because the stories have kind of moved on. And so what we always say is to everyone is like, don't try and stop us in the moment. Like, just let us do our thing and let us piece together these kind of shows. And with all the shows, we sit down and we show the various leagues what we kind of have put together, and we'll have a conversation. If something comes up that you feel is not an accurate representation, or is not you guys are not happy, or touches into a sensitive area, we'll have a conversation. And I think across all our shows, I don't think we've ever come to a point whereby we've been adamant that something has to stay in, a sports league has been adamant that it has to come out. It just never really comes to that. You sort of find the middle ground, and that's not to say that we completely roll over to whatever Eric said. I know for a fact there's things in the show that Eric's probably like, oh well, I wish that hadn't been in there. But you've got, I think audiences are slightly more sophisticated than people think, and I think the challenge with sport for a long time was that sport just thought that everything that we spoon-fed them, they were gonna, like, it's like, when you used to watch kind of, boxing kind of documentaries in the lead up to fights, and it was always like, I've had the best training camp that I've ever had, it's gonna be fine, I'm in best condition I've ever had, and and the opposite's always true, and I think the audience see through that, and I think, so our thing is always like, we're gonna be authentic, we're gonna produce the best version of the story that we think, and if you guys think differently when it's kind of put together, let's have a conversation. But it honestly has never really been a factor in any of our shows, and even going back to kind of Senna and Maradona and those things, we've never had an issue with it.
Well, I want to say thank you to all of you, our great partners at Apple TV Plus, who we want to say thank you. But again, to Jadson Andre, heel up, can't wait to see you back on the tour. Our Chief of Sport, Jesse Miley-Dyer, Paul Martin, and also acknowledge our Chief Marketing Officer in the front row, Sarah Swanson, who helped bring this together. I want to say thank you, and enjoy the rest of your time.
Thank you.